So let's talk about NBP Workflow Actions 3, Action Tools number 3. Let's get right into it. Here we go. All right, so I hope you watched the other ones. They kind of flow you through, generally speaking, what I think about my actions and what the window looks like and all of that. Be sure to watch the other actions videos. But for now, let's just get right into it. NBP Tone Saturated Areas. Hit play. Like always, it gives you a pop-up on what's going to happen. Hit continue. And there we go. All right, so what's happened here? Let's take a look. If we hold down Alt or Option, we can look at our mask and we see this crazy mask, which is a saturation mask. In other words, the lighter areas or the white areas are the most saturated color of the shot, and of course the dark areas are the least saturated color of the shot. Okay, so we can see that, of course, because in here in the neck was really, really bright white because it's saturated. And if we look at like the flowers, they're bright white because they're saturated pink, etc. But underneath this, now we can tone. So we have a hue and saturation toner. Maybe we can change the hue a little bit. And then we have color balance. You know, we can go to the mids and maybe add some warmth that we really want, or maybe a little green. I don't know. Selective color toner. We have this as well. So we can tone. We can even come to the darks. Oh, maybe not that. Maybe this. Bring in a little bit of blue. I don't know. Something like that. But here's the deal. Off, on, off, on. We're adding toning only to the more saturated areas and less to the not saturated areas. This keeps our neutral areas, or our more neutral areas, saturation-wise, it keeps them, well, more neutral. It's very, very subtle, but it gives us the main tools. Now, while we're in here, we can add things inside here as well. It's just a folder. We can add any other adjustment layer that we want in here. But let's see what happens without. So let's put this a little more extreme so we can see a result, because I know on video it's not always easy to see. Okay, something like that. Now let's go to the blacks and soften them up a bit, just a bit. Cool. All right, so this is with the saturation mask on. If I hold down Shift and click the folder mask, then it's everything. As you can see, all the neutral areas get color. That's a look. It's not wrong, but it's not what I want. That's not what this action's for. This is for allowing me to tone the saturated areas only with tools. And it gives you the 3 main tools that I like to use in terms of, you know, adjustment layers, but you can literally put anything in there. Okay. If you have Pratik Naik's, you know, infinite color, you can run it and then shove it in there, whatever. It just creates a saturation mask. So you can tone saturated areas. Very subtle, not used every time, but has a great purpose when the time is right for it. Now, NBP, reduce desaturated areas. Hit OK, or rather play. There we go. Now, of course, you know, you look at the mask now, it's inverted and it's taking the, how do I describe this? Let's talk about it. So it's reducing the vibrance, which is a different way of reducing saturation, right? It's reducing the vibrance on the desaturated areas, okay? So the more saturated areas, being in black, don't get affected as much. It's, of course, super strong. So if you turn it off and on, you'll see it's radically strong. But you can change the opacity to like a 50%. And now it's a way of taking the neutrals and making them more neutral, which is actually pretty powerful when you're going to color grade over it. For example, let's put this at 100%. Which is way too strong. Let's say we're going to do some heavy grading on top, full tilt. In other words, no mask. Okay, so let's do something really intense like that, and something really intense like this. There we go. All the color in the world, right? But the saturated areas are getting a little strong. Well, with this one running underneath it, it helps tone it down. So now your grading on top is more satisfying if you feel like you have too much saturated color, right? So by itself, not very useful, but underneath color, it could be the subtlety that you're after. Huh? And then you can change the opacity as needed. Pretty cool function when the time is right, or when you're just frustrated with color and you don't know why, run it. Maybe you're getting a false positive with too much color. The opposite is also true. Boost saturated areas. Let's run that. Okay, so what's happened? We now are boosting the vibrance and we're boosting the saturated areas. So this is, of course, quite the opposite. So turn it off and on. It's very, very subtle. We can really increase the saturation to show you. Okay, so that's actually somewhat useful, taking these saturated areas and making them stronger if you want to. You can take this and any action a step further. Okay, this one's not in the folder, but let's put it in a folder. Control or Command G. Now, while it's in the folder, I can create a mask on the folder and I can invert. Now you might think, why would I mask why would I put one layer into a folder? Because now the saturation mask is controlling the saturation range inside the folder. And I can take, let's say, a 10% flow, and I can add saturation only where I want it. Maybe I didn't want it on her face. Let's tone that down with black, choose white, maybe tone her lips up a little bit. We're adding a little bit of saturation where needed, but it's being even smarter by only boosting the saturated color. A mask of a mask, if you will. Very common in my actions, a great procedure, by the way, in general. So now we're boosting the saturated areas very, very specifically. You can run the action, you can quickly make a mask and keep going, or just leave it as is. Just some tips there on how to use that one. Pretty cool. NBP Mids Con Boost. Let's run that. Okay, very, very subtle. It usually starts at 50% opacity. There's off, on. Let's put it at 100% so you can see. As you can see, it created a luminosity mask favoring the mid-range. Okay, you can tell that the highlights are minimized, the shadows are minimized, and it's simply a brightness and contrast adjustment layer set to luminosity blending mode, and you can change the contrast. See, it's just a way of popping the mid-range contrast, which is great when you don't want your dark areas to get darker or your highlights to get brighter for the most part. It's just a very subtle way of adding a mid-range contrast pop. Automatically creates a luminosity mask for you. Specular light, specular highlight boost full. Let's run that. Okay, so what's happened? Well, first of all, it's created a levels. And in levels, it's been boosted quite a bit. See the 200 here? It's been quite a bit. But you notice it doesn't brighten the entire image. Why? Because to the right of the layer, you'll see this little symbol. Double click it. That's because a blend if has been set up. So we can choose the range that we want the brightening to affect with blend if. See that? We can choose the exact range that we want. And we can choose the intensity with this, with the levels. So you can see it's like a way of popping the highlights. Very useful, extremely useful in portrait work, but lots of other things. Now, it's sort of brother or sister action is the same thing, but this one is masked. So you run it and it's done, but it's masked. So the first thing you need to do is get a white paintbrush out and then paint the areas that you want to boost a highlight on. And there you go. That way you can pick specifically where it works. Let's increase the range a little bit so we can see it. Much easier to see in real life as opposed to a video. There we go. See that? Painted exactly what we want. Naturally, opacity is an option, blend diff range is an option, and the actual adjustment layer can be changed as well. Very useful for pop-in highlights. Super useful. NBP Brighten Subject. This is a quick fix. Sometimes it's exactly what you need just to change the attention of the shot. So hit OK. Boom. All it's done is created a curves to darken everything that's not the subject and brighten everything that is. But it blurs it. It makes these masks very soft. So it just creates a attention shift. So if I put it to like a 60% opacity, it went from cool to okay, now the attention of the eye is more to her. Call it a smart vignette, if you will. It works pretty well. It's not something I use every time either, but very, very useful when I know I want to just kind of bring a little more attention to the subject, if you will. Okay. Shadow Toner, pretty fun tool. Hit OK, or rather hit play. Now, let's explain this one. What happens is it says, all right, here's a gradient map. This gradient map is not for art purposes. It's for selection purposes. So right now, everything that's white, blending off into black, everything that's white is what our selection is going to be. As it blends gray and black, that selection becomes nothing, or it doesn't become part of the mask we're going to create. But we can use that, we can create that mask and modify it with a gradient map. So click right here on the actual gradient itself. Now we can move. We want a little more, just the deepest shadows, maybe something like that. Okay, that's only going to select the deepest shadows. Maybe I want more. It's going to select a lot more. I'm going to go in here. I'm thinking about this again like a selection, not so much anything artistic. Hit OK, hit OK. Boom. It uses the mask that we just created with a hue and saturation layer. And now I can boost the saturation of the shadows. I can reduce the saturation of the shadows. I can tone them slightly differently. See that? Okay, and I can reduce the shadows if I want. Something like that, and it's only going to affect the shadows. You can prove this by holding down Shift and clicking the mask. Boom, everything. Whereas here it's just shadows. Now I'm not saying that's a great look, but it's a way to create a fast luminosity mask for the shadows and then tone it. Okay. Same thing here, mid-range toner. Hit OK. Now, mid-range masks are a little bit weird to create because if you click on the gradient, the mid area is what we're working with. And it can be a little bit strange. A lot of times you want to blend it. Make sure they're nice and gradation like this. Because when you want to add tone to the middle area, you want to make sure it blends. It starts to look really fake if you don't. Okay, hit OK. Boom. Now we have the same thing. We can change the feel of the mid-range. Maybe a little lighter, a little more yellow, and maybe a little less saturation. Boom, boom. See that? Very, very subtle. only affecting the mid-range. It's a really, really fast way to make a luminosity mask and then tone it with hue and saturation. Highlights toner, you can probably imagine it's the same thing. Difference is, of course, that there's not a lot of highlights in the shot. So I'm going to modify the mask so I can get more highlights. Hit OK. Boom, and I've got this toner. I can make it maybe this weird blue and desaturate it and brighten it. I don't know. Boom, boom. See that? It's just a way of creating a quick luminosity mask to then do hue and saturation with. A lot of these functions are going to have crossover into other functions, but it's just a different way of looking at it, or a slightly different way of capturing a certain area. Try different things from shot to shot depending on what your vision is. All right. Shadow recover simple. Run that one. And again, every pop-up explains everything. So here's my, folder capturing one, or rather encapsulating one adjustment layer, right? So the adjustment layer mask is showing all the shadow areas. That's all that's captured. And we have exposure with a whole huge 1% stop, or excuse me, one full stop brightening. But the mask above it, which is a folder, is black. So we can take a paintbrush, usually 10-15% white, or excuse me, flow, 10-15% flow with 100% opacity, and we can casually paint the shadows. We don't have to be accurate if we want to bring the shadows back, because the mask underneath that's on the exposure adjustment layer is controlling that. We can choose though exactly where we want it to show up. Our folder mask looks like a mess, whereas our actual adjustment layer mask is very clean. This allows us to, again, paint in specifically the shadow recovery area that we want. Very, very, very useful. There's a variation on it called Advanced, Shadow Recovery Advanced. Does the same sort of thing, but the difference is you have your exposure brightening, but you have a contrast booster kind of thing. So if you came in here, or a contrast modifier, if you brightened up the shadows like I was doing earlier and you felt pretty good about it, but then you come over here and you can actually change how the contrast in those shadows feels. Okay, so you went from that, which is the normal one, this is the advanced one. Gives us a little more detail in our shadows if that's what we want, or just a different way of shaping our shadows as we bring them back. Very, very useful tool. Really, really love it. Okay, now the last one in pack number 3 is black and white control. Let's go over that one. That's going to take a minute. Okay, hit play. It'll once again tell you. The obviously result is we have a black and white image, but let's walk you through it. The first thing, there's a curves layer, there's a levels layer, and then there's a black and white converter. This is where we need to start. This is where the shot actually gets, transferred to black and white. And when we do a black and white conversion, we can move the yellow and red sliders, which generally speaking is where I start, because yellow and red sliders are where most skin tones exist. So I want to see what's going to happen there. Maybe something like that. It's a little dark. Not bad. We can play with a cyan. Usually that doesn't do much. We can play with blue. See what that does. Not going to do a whole lot. Green doesn't do a whole lot, especially on interior shots. And magenta is going to affect the outfit radically. See that? So I kind of like the flowers popping. So that works pretty well. I like that. Cool. All right. But here's the thing. That we can call it done. However, because the black and white converter is above a levels and above a curves. Oh yeah, we can use the curves to brighten, sure. But more to the point, we can choose, instead of RGB, we can go to like red curves and make modifications. Look at this. It's not necessarily brightening and darkening. It's brightening and darkening the red. And if we go to green and play with it, look at that. Look how it's swirling through different options. So we can get the exact cool black and white effect that we want just by playing until we think, oh, I like the look of that, right? Same thing with levels. You can go to reds, switch this mid-range around, get different effects. Green, look how it cycles through different looks, right? And you can just play with this until you find something that looks kind of cool. And you're like, you know what? I like that. Okay, let's say you like that. And then above the black and white converter, we have another levels. This is more for mastering to get your total black and white contrast in point. Just to add a little more contrast if you want it. Now, if you are the toning type, the shadows are masked out. Hold down Alt or Option, you can see. And the highlights are masked out. So if you're the toning type, quick mask accidentally turned on, then go to your curves of the dark tones and go to reds, for example, and you can maybe make a little bit of a tone. See that? And on the highlights, maybe you can add some blue. Let's go back to the shadows actually, and let's increase the reds. There we go. So a little bit of basic toning if you want to do like a, that duo tone kind of look, if that's your thing. You definitely don't have to use these, obviously. But either way, let's turn this off for a minute. Either way, it's a great way to do a black and white conversion in a smarter way rather than just desaturate and rather than just simply use the black and white converter. All of those tools can be used in conjunction. You can use one or the other, or just the black and white converter with maybe levels. And you go, that's the look I want. I always encourage everyone when you do black and white conversion to be creative, find different ways to do it. This is a great way. If you're not going to do it in RAW, or if you don't have another function, I do run this one from time to time because it's exactly what I want. And full disclosure, I tend to run NBP black and white control when I have not done a black and white conversion in Capture One, but I decide now that I want it black and white because most of the time I make that decision up front. That's me though. So I have this one at the ready. So if I decide, you know what, I think I want to try this one in black and white, I will run that and see what kind of looks I can get. So that's Action Pack 3 or tools number 3. Take a look at those, play around with them. As a reminder, again, like I say in all these action videos, they're not supposed to be used every single shot every single time, but they give you flexibility to get really creative.